I have a handful of stories that I'm going to share in the course of my preaching this morning. I'm going to be focusing on Isaiah 54, verses 1 through 10. This is an interesting chapter in Isaiah. It's the one right after Isaiah 53. And if you remember, Isaiah 53 is where the Messiah is described as not attractive at all, as wounded by stripes and pierced. This chapter follows that. And it's also 7 chapters before Isaiah 61, which we have on the wall up there, perhaps the key passage of which is that the Messiah takes captivity captive. That's the expression in Hebrew, extraordinary. But I'm going to illustrate some of what is here in chapter 54 with a couple of stories. The first one is from Pogo. Now, you have to be pretty old at this point to know who Pogo was. Pogo was a cartoon character in the newspapers year after year, drawn by a fellow named Walt Kelly. And if you've not ever encountered Pogo, I guess just Google Pogo online and you'll find some of those old cartoons. But the one which was most important to me, and which I remember to this day, is Pogo said, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." We have met the enemy, and he is us. Just hold that in mind as I tell a couple of shorter stories. There's a guy named Ed Solomon. You may or may not know that name. He's the author of Men in Black, the movie that was out some time ago. Very funny if you haven't seen it. Men in Black, Ed Solomon is the author. He's in a cafe having some coffee, doing some writing, and at the table next to him, some people are arguing about the origins of the story in Men in Black. And Solomon turns to them, politely says, "I might be able to help you clear that up." And one of them turns and looks at him and says, "We don't need an old white man mansplaining to us about Men in Black." And so he said, "Okay, sorry, I'll just keep to myself." Back to work. Well, he posted that on his Twitter account, and the woman who had said that to him wrote him. And he said actually a very sweet note in which she apologized. And he said, "We've carried on a wonderful email conversation since then." I tell this story because it is often true that we are quick to judge others, quick to dismiss others, quick to put others in the other category, them, us and them, when in reality, them ain't the enemy, us is, right? Another story. I was at a convention of clergy and lay leaders of many, many churches. And there were 2 pastors at this convention who were friends of mine. I mean, we didn't go out to dinner regularly or anything like that, but they were friends. And they were on the opposite side of almost every issue that I can think of, theologically, politically, whatever. We are on opposite sides. Some of you have heard about the friendship of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia, the other Supreme Court justice, opposite sides of almost every case, and yet they were dear friends while they both lived. I see that as the right model of how we are to love each other and even love our enemies. I can disagree with you, but I've got your back and you've got my back and we're friends. That friendship, I believe, is a godly thing. So I saw these 2 pastors at this convention, And I came up behind them and put my arms around them and said, "It's so good to see you." Well, they were in public where other people could see that this guy who wasn't on their side or on the side of their allies was being friendly toward them. And so they pushed my arms off of them and walked away from me so as not to be seen with me. These who had been friends in close quarters now in public are not friends. And I tell this story because I want to say sometimes people are jerks, and sometimes the people are us. We're the ones that are acting in that way. And if we are truly to live the gospel, it requires sometimes giving our minds, hearts, souls, bodies, and lives to be captive to Christ. That is what he commands from us. So here is Isaiah 54. And it begins this way in verse 1. This is such a testimony of encouragement to those who often felt themselves to be enemies of God. Sing, barren one who has not given birth. And I want to point out that in this time, for a woman to be barren was a shame. They were often rejected out of hand, turned away from. God must have cursed this woman because she has not borne children. This was a heavy, accusing burden that women who had not given birth often carried. And here, the prophet says, "Sing, barren one who has not given birth. Burst into singing and shout, you who have not travailed," that is, in childbirth. "For more are the children of the desolate," that's the same one, "than the children of the married one," says Adonai. It's an unusual claim. "Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch out your tabernacle curtains. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. For you will spread out to the right hand and to the left. Your offspring, your children, the ones that you bear, will possess the nations and will resettle desolate cities." So here's a promise that God is making to those who are barren, whether literally barren or spiritually barren, barren of heart, that there is coming a birth and a multiplication. You know, when you have a kid, you got to have a room for the baby. Sometimes you have to add it on. Sometimes what was the game room becomes the baby room. Spread out your tents, enlarge the stakes. Your offspring will possess the nations and will resettle the desolate cities. And I want to just point there for a minute and pause. A story that I've told now and again. I don't know if I've done it from the pulpit, but a wonderful sermon that I read from an imam in Egypt who was very blunt with his congregation and said, "For centuries now, you have been sitting here and looking over toward Zion, where the Zionists live." He didn't say Israel, he said Zion, where the Zionists live. And it's been barren desert. And you've left it alone to be barren desert. You sit in the cafes and drink your coffee and smoke your cigarettes and look at the barren desert. And now these people have returned to it, the desolate cities. These people have returned to it, and they have made the desert bloom. They've worked and they've put in irrigation and planted and worked, and now the desert is blooming. And so now you think it should be yours. When you're not the ones that made it bloom, you're not the ones that restored the desolate cities. Fear not, going on, verse 4, fear not, for you will not be ashamed, nor cringe, for you will not be disgraced, for you will forget the shame of your youth when you were barren. And you will remember the reproach of your widowhood no more. And here is one of the most remarkable sentences in all of Scripture, verse 5. For your Maker is your husband. And by the way, this verse is meant for both men and women to hear. For your Maker is your husband. Adonai Zavaot is his name. And I'll just pause here, open up the Hebrew for a minute. Sometimes this is pronounced Adonai Sabaoth. I've heard a preacher ask the question, well, what does that mean? And he says, oh, it just means that Lord of the Sabbath. That's not the word. Sabaoth means hosts. Multiple armies of heaven, multiple worshipers, multiple angels before the throne. Those are the hosts. That's Zavaot in Hebrew. And it's actually Yahweh Zavaot in Hebrew. That is the God above all gods and all the hosts of heaven. For your Maker is your husband, Adonai Zavaot is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer, the one who pays the price to redeem you from captivity. That's what a redeemer is, you know, when you put some laundry in and they give you a ticket and you want to go and collect your laundry. What that ticket allows you to do is redeem your laundry. That's what the word redeem means. It means to get back by paying a price. Even here is a picture of Messiah and his sacrifice, the Redeemer, the one who pays the price. He will be called God of all the earth, for Adonai has called you back. Like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit, like a wife of one's youth that was rejected, says your God. He's called you back. He's called you back. He's called you back. For a brief moment, I deserted you, but I will regather you with great compassion. In a surge of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness, I will have compassion on you, says Adonai, your Redeemer. For this is like the waters of Noah to me. For as I swore that the waters of Noah should nevermore, never again cover the earth, so I have sworn that I will not be angry with you. I had a person in this congregation many years ago, and I said, God is not angry with you. And he came up after the service and said, I have never in my life heard anyone say that God is not angry with me. For as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more cover the earth, so I have sworn that I will not be angry with you, nor will I rebuke you. For the mountains shall depart. Some translations say, if the mountains depart, or even if the mountains depart. The Hebrew says, the mountains will depart, and the hills will be shaken. But my love, chesed, my love, will not depart from you. My covenant of peace, of shalom, will not be shaken, says Adonai, who has compassion on you. That's the word of the Lord from Isaiah in chapter 54. One of the extraordinary privileges of being a pastor, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but trust me on this. One of the extraordinary privileges of being a pastor is being with people when they die. And I've had that honor many times in my life. And while each of those is holy and special in its own way, two of the people that I've been with, as the time approached for them to leave this earth, were very special. One of them, Cynthia Silvernail, whom some of you have known, school teacher. And I was in the room with her as her last hours were unfolding, and I asked her if she was frightened of dying. And she laughed, and she said, "No, I'm God's girl. What do I have to be afraid of?" And she was absolutely confident in what she said. And the other was our dear friend Rex, who many of you have known. We've even retained a testimony of his as one of the videos that we have. I actually saved the outgoing message on his answering machine because it was an invitation to come to faith always from Rex. But Rex did something very special and which touched me and filled me in ways that I can barely begin to describe. And that is this. Every single time that Rex was with us over the course of many years, if I was preaching, just before I stood up to preach, or just as I stood up, Rex would come over to me and would whisper in my ear, "God wanted me to tell you that he loves you very much." Never once did I doubt that Rex truly heard that and spoke it truly into my ear. That is the kind of encouragement that all of us are actually called to give, and to give liberally and freely to those who look like us and who don't look like us, to those who agree with us and those who don't agree with us, to those who stand where we stand and those who stand against us. God loves you very much. Hold on to that for yourself, but share it abundantly with everyone else.